his life. You never know.
Yeah, Auntie, just wanted to get your first video was awesome.
Huh?
What do you mean?
Oh, the one there?
Yeah.
That was kind of crazy.
No, it was great. It was great. But then the one,
Lately, I just get really riled up.
well, the one that we wanted to make sure that we address was what is your vision in FANHS as far as
I'll tell you
In
where
the
I am
future.
right now. I'm
Yeah.
starting to rethink it.
Go ahead.
I have to. You know why? Just like, it was interesting because when I started FANHS, our parents were dying. Well, no, actually, your mother was still alive because she went with us to
That's right.
the Philippines,
Philippines,
right?
that's right.
My mother and dad were still alive.
Yeah, you're right.
We interviewed them. I was
98,
right.
right?
So they were here in the 80s. My mom and dad were still alive, and a lot of the parents of the second generation, at least one parent was still alive. So we were the middle people. We had children. A lot of us were beginning to have grandchildren. So some of us were fourth generation. So now I have 5 generations in my family. Fred's family 6. So, but what happened is the first generation, of course, died, and a lot of the second generation since then have passed. Now, we were the ones who shared many of the same experiences as our parents in a different way. We saw it through a different lens. We saw it through an American lens. So we could get upset over some things. We were, like my dad, when I used to get on TV and start talking about problems, you know, that's when King TV would have afternoon shows. I'd be invited either on King or Cairo. And so naturally everything was there. They all wanted to know all the problems. I would talk, and I'd go to mom and dad's house, and dad would say, "Why'd you talk about that? What do you know? We're Filipinos." And my mother would say, "I'm so glad you spoke like that." So there's a male and the female kind of a thing. My dad, because he had to go out in the workplace, accepted it. Mom didn't accept it.
When you say accepted what?
Accepted discrimination, being silent. I'm not saying all of them did. Did your dad fight about it?
No.
Okay. Because in order for them to keep a job,
Right.
they didn't walk the boat. That didn't mean that they didn't experience it. One of the most interesting interviews I did, I was interviewing Mr. Quintero. This is back around 1980. And I was saying, of course, I'm into discrimination. So Manong, tell me about any discrimination you experienced. He said, "Oh, no, Ading, I had no discrimination." Into the other room, I could hear his wife yelling at him, "What do you mean? They called you brown monkey? They called you all these names. Isn't that discrimination?" I mean, that was the wife again. But the man accepted it. You know, I'm not saying they all did, but during civil rights, there was a silence. And so when Fred and I and some of us others started to fight for civil rights, I had an uncle, my favorite uncle, called Fred and I communist. Communist, because we were fighting for the rights that we were entitled to as Americans. You know? It was like my dad saying, "What do you expect? You're Filipinos." So I think in a way, what happened, so we've gathered the history, but even in the beginning when I was gathering the history, some of the more pertinent questions I asked was, how were you treated in this country? I think in a way we've steered away from that. Tell us about the good times. You know, we had this and we had that. No, I want to know how you're accepted. And if I would even interview the new immigrants now, I'd say, "Was there a glass ceiling for you? Okay, what were you in the Philippines?" "I was an executive." "So what are you now?" "Okay, don't even answer, because you're not." Because they aren't. And that's the tragedy a lot of times. Again, they accepted the thing. I'm not saying they should go fight. I spent the 70s fighting. I just got tired of it, you know. I thought my head was going to blow up. Really. I mean, you figure some of the craziest years in America as a parent were the 60s and 70s. All hell was breaking loose. You know that? Yeah, it was. She was telling me about the first part I was confessing. He said, "You know what happened, Mom?" I said, "No, I was busy cooking and doing all the other things." He said, "There was all these things happening under my eyes." And my good God. But things were happening in social justice, but I wasn't seeing what was happening with the people who were there. I mean, there was free love, drugs, all that other stuff. We had to deal with it as parents. I mean, kids were throwing away the values that their grandparents, I mean, my generation, I'm American, okay, American born. First person in my entire family born in the United States. My claim to fame. And, no, really, that's the only reason I tell them. My only claim to fame is the first person in my family born in the U.S. on either side of my mother's side, my dad's side. And so I had old world values plus Catholic school values. I was really so stupid. I went to the Second Far West Convention in Stockton, and the kids were out in the field. I could smell. I asked people, what's that sweet smelling stuff? They were smoking weed. I mean, I didn't know. What do I know? I mean, shoot. Oh, really? Is that what they're doing? Oh my God, we're gonna go to jail. And yet I was youth director of a youth program. So I had to watch these kids whose parents entrusted their kids to me. Am I bringing them to damnation? Holy smoke.
So then when you talk about rethinking FANHS, so that's the
reason
initial.
I'm rethinking now is because FANHS is now 36. When I sent out my letter, in my last newsletter for DPA, and I said, does anyone want to join a historical society? And, I'll be son of a gun. They did. But it took time for it to come about. And the chapters didn't really start until Lourdes started the first one. And that was after the first conference in 1987. So I think 1988, 89 was the first one. So you're number 4. You beat Seattle. And, but my peers, my generation, you're older, you're second generation like me, but you're the same age as my children. Mm-hmm. So, okay, those of us born in the teens, the 20s, the 30s, well, the teens are gone, they're dead. But the late 20s, the 30s, the 40s, like my sisters, we're all getting old, and each one of us have friends who have died recently. So with us, when our parents died, if we didn't get to them, part of their history is disappeared. We have not interviewed my generation. Really. Very few of us. We were just interviewing the old timers. And unfortunately, here was the sad thing. I was interviewing the old timers and doing research on the new arrivals. Missing my people, my age completely. And I just finished telling you some of the things that we went through. John was talking.
Right.
Vietnam War.
Sure.
I'm talking about the social upheaval. We were in the United States. I'm not talking about what happened in the Philippines, or it's doing folk dancing on weekends, eating adobo and with bulgogi and whatever. No. I'm talking about living in the damn United States. How did we exist? I mean, really. So I have a question, but I will pose there. I think people are going to have to realize, are they more Philippine or Filipino-American? And I say that to the students at UW who come visit me. Every August or September, they come here, the officers of FASA. And I ask them, okay, what are you, more Philippine or Filipino-American? And that's precisely, I'm going to say there, that in my opening statement, I'm going to just say, during the time of martial law, what was it a case of? We had to make a decision, were we more Philippine or Filipino-American? If we were more Philippine, then we had to be more vested in what was happening in the Philippines. Consequently, martial law and fighting against Marcos. If we were more Filipino-American, we were fighting for civil justice. We were fighting for our place in the sun here. And this has to be said, especially at this time in history, when a lot of that bullshit when a lot of the stuff that's going on in the government, a lot of things, little by little, things are being chipped away. And it was already being chipped away here in Seattle, in the Seattle area. Back in around 1999, affirmative action that was put in place was gradually being diminished. I was working in the polls. I never saw so many young white men come to vote that election. And I never saw them afterwards. They came to vote in, they're right. They were afraid that dark people were going to take over. Seattle's become a white city again.
That's a strong statement.
It is. I mean, hey.
That's because all the minorities moved out in the
they
city.
can't afford to live here, for Christ's sake.
Exactly.
And and the thing is, people like to argue with me. I'll tell them, hey, how long have you lived here, dearie? I've lived here my whole life. I know the central area. I've been vested in this area my whole life. Maybe I lived in the valley, but every day we came here to go to school. My kids went to school in this building, or O'Day, or St. Mary, and I've gone to work in this area, right smack in the center of the central area. You couldn't be more center than this. Man, we're right in a pivotal place. Really.
That's a good one. Center of the center.
Yeah, right. And so
then, therefore,
I think right now what we have to do is we have to say, it isn't so much that we have regressed, and I think this is what a lot of people, well, we've done much better than we have before. Okay, that's cool. But you know what? Every year there's a new set. We always forget about the little people. A lot of times, who belongs to FANHS? Who comes to our conferences? It's the middle class. We interview. I've deliberately gone out to interview the non-middle class people. Because quite frankly, I find their lives more interesting. Collectively, they tell a little story. And yet, on the other hand, I can't even say that. I could take that back too. Because doing the social research that I was doing back in the early 70s, I had to work with people who came here as doctors, as
engineers,
engineers, teachers, and all struggling to get a place work. So part of what we were doing, that's how I met Stan Harris. He would be driving me and a bunch of the doctors and the dentists. We're going to Olympia, knocking on doors, trying to get people to vote. That's how I met Jim McDermott. Who put in, he's the one, I remember Jim, it was a physician's assistant. He's the one who pushed for the creation of the physician assistant position in the state of Washington. He called me up around 2 years after it went in and asked me how many Filipino doctors got it. I said, 1. We had sent the rest of them away to the Midwest, to Indian reservations, small towns. And they weren't just the doctors, there were a lot of others, people. I remember talking at FACES, the Filipino Americans
educators,
civic employees in Seattle. And they asked me to tell about my research, to start talking. All of a sudden I started to cry. I didn't realize how emotional I still was about that. Because I remember these people. I started to do documentation at that time. And we don't talk about it. Of the house husbands that we were developing. You know why? Because at the time of civil rights, they were documenting minority and female. If they had a choice between a Filipino man and a Filipino woman for the same position, they would take the Filipino woman because they could mark it twice. Female, minority. You did a man, minority. And I'm saying it's not just with Filipinos, it was with the others. It wasn't, So, and then there were things that happened. Things outside of your right, you can't control things that are happening. When wars come, we lost a lot of our young men. That's why I became anti-war. Because 2 of the kids I taught folk dancing to came home in body bags. Until then, I was really patriotic. And I thought, man, these kids hadn't even started to live. They were 17, 18 when they left the war. And when they came back, they were 18. And they had died within that year.
So then primarily then the role of FANHS when we basically started has changed and evolved to...
Right, we have. But I think right now what we have to do, not just do it, but we should do some analysis. I'm really into critical thinking. Can things happen again? They say history repeats itself. So what's going to repeat itself? The good things, the bad things, or in between, or everything? I'm just saying that we don't, even at the conferences, we don't have time for discourse. Like what I'm saying to you right now, How many times have you heard people say these things? I miss Fred right now, because he and I would have these long discussions.
I'll be right there too.
That'd be cool. Yeah, that'd be good. No, but I don't want to be the one mouth saying it. I'd like people to just go. I mean, I'm an old lady. I'm 86. And the thing is, I see the younger generation getting all their information on the internet.
Exactly, yeah.
And how much of that is regurgitation that's been tampered with one way or another? I'm saying this. I'm going to challenge everybody there at that thing. How many of you have interviewed a loved one? How many of you have even written down part of your own history so you can share it with your family? Here's the thing. There's going to come a time that everything that FANHS produces will be the history of Filipinos in the United States. It is becoming that right now. Well, is it going to stop with us now? Or is there going to be a continuum? Because what happened at the conference, once we leave on the 15th, that's history. I truly believe that everybody is important. Everybody. Everybody has a story. Everybody's story is so different. I'm intrigued. I mean, when I was listening to what Jeffrey was saying on the phone, just even looking through yearbooks, I'd like to pick their brain on that. I would like to develop people who are curious, and I don't see that. Curious enough that they will follow a lead. That's why I love two of the women who I'm going to work with on panels are Diane Riddell and Marina, and they're finally going to meet each other. Well, Marina doesn't know anything about Diane, but Diane knows everything about Marina, and they're going to meet each other. And Marina continues searching. She could have just rested on her laurels on what she did already, but she continues to search. I think that's so commendable. And Diane, she could have stopped with her father being in Alaska and then in Hawaii, but she's searching. She's going to him through Liverpool. And it's the way, he may not have been the only Filipino to do this, This could have been a lifestyle for a number of Filipino men, but at least that's not her dad. Those aren't her father. So she had leads from her dad. He left clues behind. And the thing is, how many people will pick up on the clues that their parents leave behind? Okay, I got one. My dad. So we had a genealogy thing here at FANHS, Seattle did it, and Devin did my dad as an example. So I knew that because I had his ship's manifest when he arrived here in 1919. He was still 18. And on the thing, his destination was Chicago. All right. But he doesn't go to Chicago. And his cousin, Pablo, and it's funny, I just found a postcard from my Uncle Pablo that I forgot I had. So anyway, he was also supposed to go to Chicago. These two men on the ship, that's 3 weeks, decided that even though in Manila they said that they're going to go to Chicago, they stay in Seattle. Why? So that my father can help put his cousin through the University of Washington. It was a decision they had made. How many decisions were changed on the boat? On the plane, you only have 17 hours. That's going to have to be really quick, On the ship, you can. There were a lot of things that were happening on the ship. Chris Gonsalves talks about watching a burial at sea. On the plane, they're going to throw the body out over the, open the hatch and throw him out. No, I don't think so. So there were different things. Well, the thing was, my dad and Uncle Pablo were supposed to go to, I had Devin look it up. And the person they were supposed to see was this other uncle, whose last name was Dumo. So I had Devin look up this fellow on Auntie.com. The first instance he had of this fellow was Stanford University of Stanford. That's where He goes to Stanford. However, he lands in Chicago. Did he graduate? I don't think so. Why did he leave? He wasn't a pensionato. Evidently, he had to work. So he ends up in Chicago. So we look again for him. He's working for the damn railroad there. I never met the man because when my father died, any contact with the Ligos or any of the Ligos, stopped because my mother didn't know them. Well, I asked my cousin Loretta, did you ever meet this guy? She says, yeah, I met him on his way back to the Philippines when he retired. And I said, what did he retire from? For the railroad. So from 1930 till he leaves in the 1960s, he worked for the railroad, as did a lot of other Filipinos. Many of them were stewards. So why did this man who went to the United States to attend Stanford University
wind up in Chicago?
All these whys that I have. It's the little things, and it's the little things like, what happened? But he was going to welcome his two nephews. Was he a steward? I don't know. Here's a funny thing. I'm going to close with that when I do your session. I'm just going to, what I told you, I have to distill it into 30 seconds. If my dad had continued on to Chicago, I wouldn't have been born because he never would have met my mother. I wouldn't have founded FANHS, and none of you would be here today because there wouldn't be no coffee.
Well, that's very true.
That's my closing remark.
But then okay.
I mean, it's true.
No, it's
all
true.
these little twists and turns of history, right?
So in other words, what we're talking
What if your
about?
dad was here?
You're right.
How do we know he didn't have a girlfriend here?
He did.
What if he married her instead?
She was white.
Huh?
She was white, and he was not allowed to.
No, you could marry her. Oh, he was in Oregon.
Yeah, he was in
Okay,
Oregon.
they couldn't get married in Oregon. Well, they could have done what a lot of other guys in Oregon did. They went over to Vancouver, Washington. So he wasn't that much in love with her. Because that's what they did. They went over to, or some of the guys in California either came up to Washington or they went to Arizona and got
So what your message is for this next generation is
There are
to
more
get back
stories.
is
We
to
don't-
get back to the basics, to get off the Google stuff. Let's go one-on-one and start talking.
Some of the interesting stories aren't on Google. Because you know what? They don't tell stories. They tell dates
Facts.
or whatever. They don't tell the human part.
Right.
I mean, really, who gives a shit? You know what? It's not interesting out there on the thing. I mean, people, I got the answer. Yeah, sure. I mean, really, like that when that guy stole their pic when he went and took Fred's book and he took the pictures. He put your dad there and he described him as a recent immigrant.
So Auntie Dorothy,
Should have sued the man.
so Auntie Dorothy, how do you see the vision of FANHS?
I don't know. It's not going to be my vision. I mean, look, in 5 years I could be dead. I could be dead next week. They're burying a woman who was just at the event that you were at. She looks really good. In fact, that's exactly what I said to her. Marlene, you look good. She died. Her brother was amazed. He said she looked really good. She had a